Welcome to the Mullin' It Over podcast with Reverend Jack Mullins and Austin Covey. How's it going, everybody? And welcome to another edition of Mullin' It Over with me, Austin Covey, and
Reverend Jack Mullins.
And today we've got 3 questions that were submitted by a viewer, and so we're going to start from the top and work our way down them. I think our first one is, can teenagers preach the gospel? And I don't know any backstory on this at all. It was just a question that was submitted. I'm very curious what the backstory is. But I think we'll attack that one from the top. And what do you think? Can teenagers preach the gospel?
Yeah.
That's my answer too. Pretty short, right? I mean, when I was a kid, we had like youth week at church.
Yeah.
And the youth would run the whole service. And usually an older high school kid would preach, but everybody would do something. So
yeah. Knowing the background, I do happen to know the individual that submitted this question, and I do know that she, as a youth, and by youth I mean individual between grades 9 and 12, so say 14 to 18, I do know that she preached during those times and was very effective. I've known other teens who have done it. Part of me reacts with the question, why would you even ask?
Yeah, that's why I'm really curious what the backstory is. Now, I don't know that a teen would be somebody who would preach all the time. You know, I don't know that that's somebody who would preach every Sunday. But I guess if they have the ability to, then...
Well, that's true. And I know some of the... Now, I spent 25 years doing youth ministry. I probably overstayed my welcome. But I do know that there are some kids, some youth who have that gift, and they are able to do it, and they have a level of understanding and comprehension beyond their years. They are rare.
Like a spiritual maturity to them.
They do. You know, and we look in Scripture, the prophet Elijah began as a boy, a very young man. David began as a boy. We even have the story of Jesus when the family had gone to Jerusalem when he was, we think, around 12. It would have been about time for his bar mitzvah. Which would have explained why he was there and hanging around the temple. And his depth of understanding astounded the priest in the temple. So there is scriptural background to it.
Yeah, Jesus was definitely the one I thought of, you know, that was teaching at a young age. I am curious where the question came, there are, I guess, maybe certain traditions that we know of that would say, I guess we've seen it for women, right, that women are only qualified to preach to women. I don't know if maybe they would say kids are only youth are only qualified to preach to youth or what, but...
Yeah, and I think part of my bias is that it sometimes is a power thing. Certain groups like to retain power, and sometimes that translates to the power or authority to preach the gospel.
Right.
They don't want the wrong people preaching the wrong message. So we control that. Wrong.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you. So the way we control that is we control who has access to the pulpit.
Right.
There is some validity to the argument that a teenager may not have the depth of experience to put the message in context.
They can put it in their context.
They can put it in their context, exactly. And that's why, now I don't know about your setting growing up, but I would suspect that there were youth sponsors or youth ministers who provided some degree of support as you develop those sermons and guidance.
Well, I never preached one, I don't think. I don't ever remember doing that.
Okay.
But I'm sure there was either the pastor or someone else was helping do that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I was thinking about putting it in their context. I think some irony of that is if a teenager is preaching, everybody listening has once been in their context.
Exactly.
If someone who is older is preaching, maybe half the people there have never been in that context,
Absolutely.
So if anything, sometimes teenagers might have a broader... Now, it depends on whether those of us who are a little older can relate back to the teenage years.
Whether we can even remember.
Right. But it is fair to say when a teenager preaches, most of the people in the audience have probably been in their shoes before versus the other way around.
That's right. And you certainly sit up and pay closer attention because there's always that element of the loose cannon.
Yeah. Yeah, I was thinking that you never know what they're going to say.
Exactly. But, and I've told the story before. I don't know if I've told it in this context. Was in the process of leaving a church and was conducting a pastor's class program, which is kind of like catechism class. It's preparatory class for kids planning on making confession of faith, being baptized. Had a family come to me. Our first grader wants to be baptized by you, and they want to go through the class. I said, okay, here's the deal. Here are the rules. They have to be present for every class. You have to help them do all of the readings. They have to do all of the homework. At the end of the class, it's a 6-week class, I will sit down with every student, including your little girl, and we'll have a one-on-one conversation about what they understood. Came to that point, sat down with the little girl, talked about what she had learned. She had good grasp, understood what communion was. And I said, why do we become baptized? Why do we do a confession of faith? And her answer was to save us from the big spanking. Preach it, girl. Yeah. I mean, she had it. It was in first grade language. It was from a perspective relevant to where she was in life, but it was on target, to grant us salvation and deliverance at our end.
Right.
She had it, she understood, and she had a way to proclaim it. That's what preaching is, proclamation of the Holy Story. She did it. In that moment, she preached it. And that story, I've recycled that story many times. Her simple proclamation has preached the gospel time and time again.
So even a first grader can preach the gospel.
Even a first grader.
Not just teenagers.
That's right. Why do people react against it? And you kind of alluded to it. Why do some people react against women preaching? Why do we pigeonhole people that for whatever reason their understanding of the gospel doesn't, quote unquote, match ours?
Right, or doesn't apply to us.
Or is inadequate. Yeah. So, the simple answer is yes. And I'm like you, I wonder what prompted her to raise the question.
Right.
I suspect, and this is merely my trying to think outside of the box or trying to put myself in her position. Somebody probably got in her face over somebody whom they determined to be inadequate to preach. I do know in her background, her appropriateness for her role at one point was challenged based on the fact that she was young, female, and gay.
Oh, gotcha.
And so I know one individual who tried to undercut everything she did based on those criteria. And yet she had a beautiful and a pure message and outlook at the gospel. So there was a different agenda attacking this teenager
Right.
preaching the gospel.
And it's not to get too far afield, but it's interesting sometimes how many of the that's a combative word. I won't use that word. How many of the stumbling blocks to the church occur within the church?
Oh, absolutely.
I was going to use a different word, and I was like, that sounds a little harsher, so I won't use that one. But sometimes we are our own greatest hindrance. So,
and that's unfortunate, but you're exactly right. And
I wondered if maybe she was pushing for like a youth Sunday or something at the church that she's at now, and was trying to make the argument for why that should be a thing. But
that's certainly possible. And I think that's something a lot of youth people involved in youth ministry face from time to time.
Yeah.
You get to a church for whom that is not part of their tradition. And for those congregations, it can be a fairly radical step.
Mm-hmm.
How do you expect us to allow a 15 or 16-year-old in the pulpit? The pulpit is sacred. How dare you? How dare you ask us to allow them behind the communion table to tell us how to experience communion? That's a little bit different.
I think I have seen that applied before.
Yeah.
Certainly, I think parts of the sanctuary can become holy cows, which may sound blasphemous, but some people, I think, get more attached to the building than they are to what's happening inside the building. So
yeah. When I was at my previous congregation, I dared to move the communion table.
Yeah, that was a hard thing to get around there, wasn't it?
And
I could probably name the people who were not happy about it.
And a couple of them might surprise you, and I've run against that in other congregations. It was not unique to that one, and they always had a reason why it should not be done. A congregation I served in Garland, Texas, was because it was so big and heavy, and it was a semicircle. I got somebody to come up and help me flip it over, and I mounted wheels to the bottom of it so we could roll it around.
That's awesome.
And the wheels were not visible from the congregation. So,
I think the one that we had when I was a kid, it was big. It was like almost an octagon kind of thing.
Yeah.
It was obviously hollow inside, right, and just facaded. But I think it had wheels on it. But even it may not have, because it took. I mean, we used to move it a lot, because it's set right in the center of the chancel. But anytime we did like a special thing at Christmas or whatever, like we had to get it off. So, but you had to carry it downstairs to get it,
right?
And it was. We never had an aversion to moving it, but it took. It was an event to move it, not because it was the communion table, just because it was huge.
Right. Right.
So.
And sometimes, moving youth into the chancel can be just as challenging as moving a table out of it.
Yeah, it's true.
But what I have found is usually afterwards, the congregation and quite frequently those who are most reluctant are those who have been most changed by the experience. Right. And they'll come up and say, why haven't we done this before? Because you kept saying no.
It's like, weren't you the one saying no?
You're not going to get the same kind of theological interpretation of the Scripture because they don't have the experience, they don't have the training, they don't have the study, but you may get a very much more practical application and experience of the Word than you might otherwise.
Well, and that's what I was kind of thinking was sometimes I wonder if all those extra layers don't help us miss the forest for the trees.
Yeah.
You can, I think, add so many layers to your perception of something that Like I remember taking an AP English class in high school, and we were reading some book. I don't remember what the book was, and the character in the book's eyes were gray. And the teacher's like, gray eyes mean this, that, and the other. It's like, or maybe the author just wanted the character to have gray. You know, it's like maybe you're overreaching into.
Yeah.
Maybe the author just went, oh, I bet this would look cool, or they had some image in their mind of what they thought this person looked like, and so that's what they wrote.
Yeah.
Opposed to, I mean, I guess if you had documentation of the author specifying that's what they meant, that's fine. But maybe sometimes we're trying to make something that isn't there.
I have known of and listened to preachers who believe that it has to fit. You know, you have to have 3 points, and each point should be 7 minutes long, or you're cheating the congregation, or there's no way you can make it more simple than that. And you know, if your point takes 7 minutes or 10 minutes to explain, that's one thing. If you can explain it in 3 or 4, why not do that rather than use filler to take up time and make it seem
bigger than it is?
Bigger than it is.
I knew a guy that was every sermon was 3 points. 3 things I'd like to tell you about today.
Well, that's what they would teach us in homiletics class,
really?
in our preaching classes. You know, 3-point sermon, and that was doctrine.
Oh, I dropped out before then, and the one time I preached was not 3 points.
And you know, I figure I'm doing good if I get 2.
If I get 1, that's probably a win.
But youth belong in the pulpit, and they have a great deal to say about the gospel. So
they belong in the church in general. It seems like more and more churches are killing youth programming.
Yeah.
If they don't have, they feel like they're running out of funds, and so they kill the youth programming. Never mind that their future funds are going to come from the kids that are in the.
Right.
Never mind the biblical part of it, just the practical part of it. Don't
Exactly.
Don't cut off your roots. It's not a good way to grow a tree.
Not at all. Not at all. Thank you for joining us today for this episode of Mulling It Over. I hope that you found something meaningful and beneficial to take with you.
If you have any questions or topics you would like to hear us discuss, you can either put them down in the video comments, or you can email them to us at office@irvingnorthcc.org.
As always, we want to invite you to join us for worship every Sunday morning, 11 o'clock a.m. at Irving North Christian Church, 2602 Texas Drive, Irving, Texas. May God bless.